for the slight delay in this new session, second session of the Santander-CIDOB Future Leaders Forum. This is the event we are celebrating today on the future of the digital global order, algorithmic governance, and artificial intelligence. As I said, it's the second edition of the Future Leaders Forum, a joint initiative of Santander and CIDOB, precisely to identify and give voice to the young voices that are playing a key role in international affairs, and more particularly in the area of technology and everything digital. So our aim at CIDOB is and has always been to have a fresh view on the issues that affect our international agenda. And now, thanks to this initiative and others that we are undertaking, to also count with these young voices. The Future Leaders Forum is called the Future Leaders, but by seeing the list of the community that is joining us, I would say rather that they are current leaders more than future leaders, because what we have been doing in the last few months has been to identify the different voices and profiles whom, according to their merits so far, to the work that they are doing in their respective fields, they are becoming essential actors to understand, in this case, why algorithmic governance and artificial intelligence are key forces behind the development of our societies, and also, of course, the international society. We're all very aware that algorithmic tools are everywhere. They are everywhere in all aspects of our society, from supply chains to our need and the help that they provide to prevent diseases, to fight climate change. Many other aspects are also ruled by algorithmic tools and in the framework of artificial intelligence. But we are also very aware that these tools also have their downside when it comes to the effects that they can have on very grounded models of our societies, particularly in the area of justice, more crucially. So the way that these algorithms rule the decisions that are taken thanks to these tools must also comply with very grounded aspects of our liberal international order and our liberal and just societies. That is precisely that these tools do not leave anyone behind at the moment that more and more decisions are precisely taken thanks to these mechanisms. So in a sense, of course, it is a way forward and a crucial aspect to improve the way we do public policy, the way we do public policy at the national, but also at the international level. But also, we must be very aware of the let's say, the negative effect or the potential negative side effects that these tools also entail. So precisely to discuss these issues, we've decided to gather these voices today on the occasion of the second edition of the Future Leaders Forum, as I said, and have the opportunity to identify and to see all these voices that have been mobilized in the last few months, thanks to a video that will follow later, and then count, of course, with the participation of our very esteemed colleagues from Banco Santander, in particular, Cristina San Jose, who is the data directors at Grupo Santander, and who will say a few words after the video, but then also have the chance to discuss and to elaborate a bit further on some of the issues that I mentioned here with Noria Olivé, who is co-founder and vice president of ELIS, and also with Andrea Garcia Rodriguez, who is a researcher at CIDOB, focusing precisely on AI and the role of algorithmic governance and their impact on cities, but also at the international level. And then finally, last but not least, we will be joined by Carmen Artigas, who's the Secretary of State for digitalization and artificial intelligence from the government of Spain, who will say a few words before we start a networking private session with the members of this list of the 35 voices that we have joined in this 35 under 35 years old list of leaders who are shaping the world on digital affairs and artificial intelligence, and also together with the 35 other leaders that were identified in the previous session, in the first session of the Future Leaders Forum, who will also be present in the discussion afterwards. So let me conclude by saying a big thanks, of course, to Banco Santander for their support in this initiative, for their interest in and their sharing this ambition to mobilize these young forces, to promote the young voices in international affairs and in technological affairs, and also, of course, a big thank you and congratulations as well to all those members that are today part of the community, who are joining the community that was established last year with the 31st first voices, and that today we are expanding to further 35, so a total of 70 voices already identified and part of this global, the Future Leaders Forum that we are having today, thanks to Santander. So without further ado from my side, let me now just show to all of you a video presenting the list of these 35 voices, the 35 under 35 list that we have gathered, and then we will continue with this event that we are broadcasting as well. And also thank you very much to all those who are listening to us and viewing us from their places of work, from their homes, or from wherever they are getting this event going. So please let me introduce you the list of the 35 under 35 young voices.
Through general policies and sanctions, we can ensure the right behavior we want to see in our society.
I think it's important to set up an ethical framework that will enable us to develop a people-centric artificial intelligence, always with respect for ethical and democratic values.
To ensure that human rights violations, risk are taken into account, mitigated, and sometimes repaired, we need to look at which structures we have built and interrogate them.
Some of these biases are uniquely African and require contextual analysis and can therefore not be fixed through Western analysis alone.
To trust AI, we need to understand questions such as, what data do we have? Where does it come from? How is the data being obtained?
There has been so many AI policy and governance frameworks produced in the last couple of years. It has been hard to find common ground out there.
Policymakers and judges must take this problem seriously and recognize that it cannot be fixed simply through the use of human oversight of particular algorithmic decisions.
AI may also lead to the creation of new spheres of influence, leading to a bifurcation of the global order between authoritarian and democratic systems.
It's not about making algorithms trustworthy, but about creating trust in the people and institutions behind them and using them.
The limited collaboration between social sciences and technical disciplines, which I think is critical.
Freedom of choice is the most important challenge for AI in the next 10 years.
We should focus on developing models that can both give us an answer to a problem and also explain to humans why their proposed solution is better than what we have now.
How do we build AI that is reliable? How do we build AI that we can trust? We have both fundamental technical and governance challenges to solve.
If we want to build a fully equal and inclusive digital world, we need to make sure that diversity actually exists in the development of AI and algorithmic systems.
We need to align AI systems with human preferences. And here, the technical and the policy communities need to work together to ensure that we have safe and reliable AI.
Achieving a world where the power to develop AI technologies is not concentrated in the hands of few, and broadly implementing overarching ethics in practice.
Which understandings of the human and the machine will form the basis for future society, increasingly driven by algorithmic governance and AI.
To make sure that we adequately govern the use of AI technology in international law, whether to create or to enforce regimes.
One of the biggest challenge that we'll be facing when it comes to artificial intelligence is to create appropriate regulatory and governance frameworks.
I think that if you want to rule AI, you first have to rule your data.
Speaking as a jurist, one of the most pressing challenges is determining if and how to change existing law to best accommodate societal changes brought on by the use of AI system.
Anyone who deploys an AI system in any setting that could put rights at risk must carry out a mandatory human rights impact assessment.
The emergence of algorithmic governance and artificial intelligence makes rethinking the relationship between public administrations, disruptive technologies, and citizens a necessity.
We need engagement of individuals, users, politicians, and developers to take responsibility and understand the challenges.
Intensification of the rivalry between the two major powers, especially US and China, that will result in forms of cyber colonialism.
On a global scale, the challenge to come up with efficient and suitable governance frameworks will be key to guide the development of safe, trustworthy, but also more sustainable AI.
I believe that the EU's human-centric approach to technology is the right way to go. Human rights and democratic values must be, by design, at the core of any use and development of new digital technologies.
We need global cooperation on concrete, enforceable legal rules for AI governance rather than just pretty words.
We are at a political and legal momentum to regulate AI and strike the delicate balance between finding creative and trustworthy solutions to solve global challenges and mitigating the negative impact of AI systems.
We just need to ensure that future algorithms, trainings, especially the delegated ones, are less biased as possible and doesn't exclude any point of view from the society.
Adopting a design approach that centers human values and monitors the system across its full life cycle is the best way forward to ensure that AI systems remain under meaningful human control.
This is not just a competition to get the best accuracy out of the model. And this is about dealing with people's rights.
One of the main challenges is going to be the potential unemployment crisis. Unlike the technologies that fueled the industrial revolutions, AI will not break down advanced tasks done by a specialized group of people into simpler ones.
As we favor one implementation over another, we also temporally lock in particular values and norms.
It might fundamentally change the understanding of security, and therefore it might pose new security threats to our society, to our political order that we're yet unprepared for.
Well, thank you very much. Congratulations to all those who have been selected under 35 years of age who are part of these 35 names shaping AI and algorithmic governance. As you will have witnessed, the list has gone global. We have participants coming from 20 different countries who are making our network of young voices more diverse, more global, and of course more representative of the different voices that are shaping the future of global technological politics. So let me thank Hector Sanchez, Cristina Serrano, and Andrea Rodriguez for their efforts in bringing these voices together. Also thanking all the participants who nominated peers in this edition, coming from the previous edition, and nominated relevant people to form this new list. And as I said, congratulations to all of you. I'm sure we'll have a very fruitful discussion. And now I give the floor to Cristina San Jose, as I said, Chief Data Officer of the Santander Group. Cristina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for having me here with the patience to listen to me. I wanted to start this session today with two provocative thoughts. And the first one is, let's imagine the following situation. Let's imagine we have developed an artificial intelligence algorithm that, based on your blood tests, was able to predict whether you're going to develop cancer in the following 24 months. with extraordinary accuracy. Let's also imagine that we have tested whether this algorithm is actually more accurate than current doctors in its predictions. And we have done so by contrasting both opinions on thousands of cases from our recent history, and we conclude unequivocally that such algorithm is indeed more precise, and that we have now a fantastic diagnostic tool to anticipate cancer development and hence provide a better preventive treatment to those subjects. Imagine that this algorithm is going to be used in hospitals in order to precisely run diagnostics on patients and attack cancer before it actually develops. I guess that, at least at first sight, we would all be very happy with such algorithm that feeds from the subject blood tests, of course provided consent, and provides a very accurate diagnostic. But now imagine that the very same algorithm, built exactly the same way, eating exactly the same blood test data, was to be used by an insurance company in order to calculate the price of health insurance for the patient. The algorithm being the same, we would be extremely against it, because it seems unfair that because of some blood test analysis, you get a much higher insurance, or maybe you're actually rejected, being excluded from proper healthcare. But the algorithm is the same, the data is the same, and the technicalities behind are absolutely the same. The change is the use case. So my first provocative thought for you would be whether, rather than regulating the technique, the nitty-gritty of the math behind, we shall not be regulating the use case. Because how are we going to prevent the insurance company from developing such algorithm? Do we want to hamper the accuracy by constraining the techniques we can use or constraining the data? Because on the other hand, we want the hospital to be able to have this tool. So my first thought for you is whether we shall not debate on use cases rather than the actual technology behind. Because the technology is neither good or bad by itself. It's good or bad depending on how you use it. My second provocative thought for this discussion is about black boxes. There seems to be a big concern about black boxes, that we shall not consent black boxes to rule our lives. And I certainly agree. But think of nuclear power stations. I don't understand them. I really don't understand what's going on with the uranium and all this water steam that's coming out, and why sometimes accident happens or not. What's the physical chain reaction behind? I have no clue about nuclear power stations because I have no clue about physics nor engineering. But still, nuclear power stations are not outside of the law. There are specific security regulations that rule their maintenance and construction. Construction is, I could not build a nuclear power station myself because I have no idea. But the engineers behind it certainly do have an idea. Should I reject nuclear generated power just because it is a black box for me? Or shall I trust the fact that the people building it are certified professionals that know what they're doing? In my view, a bit of the same is happening with artificial intelligence. Is it realistic to expect that every subject, every citizen understands complex math behind artificial intelligence algorithms so that we can safely say it is not a black box? Or is it enough that the actual professionals of artificial intelligence, the mathematicians, understand it, are certified, as engineers building power stations are certified, so that it is not a black box for them? They know how they work, where they say black or whether they say blue, rather than enforcing full understanding of the entire population, technical or not, of a technology which is in itself complex? Is it realistic? Or shall we trust in the professionals behind it? What would it take us to trust these professionals the same way we trust engineers building bridges or power stations? Those are my two thoughts for reflection. The first one is about whether regulating the technology makes sense instead of regulating the use case. And the second is, what is realistic when we're asking for black boxes not to be in place? Black boxes for whom? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christine. Extremely thoughtful first input dealing with questions that are actually part of not only technology and AI in our societies, but that rule our societies in general when it comes to the issues that you mentioned of trust, of justice, of knowledge, and the way we manage and deal with knowledge, progress, and how technologies help us advance those progresses, delegation of responsibilities, whom is responsible for what, and what do we, what frameworks do we establish between these authorities and the population at large. So all these aspects are certainly part of artificial intelligence, but also of the way we govern our societies in general. So thank you very much for bringing this, for putting these issues on the table. And let me now give the first also reaction and elaboration of perhaps on something that was already mentioned by Cristina to Noria Olivet. Noria Olivet, she has been working on artificial intelligence for a long time. She's the co-founder and vice president of ELIS. And I also very much recommend to you a podcast that for those who speak and understand Spanish, a podcast that she did with Ramon González Ferriz on precisely the issues that we are discussing today on artificial intelligence and the governance of artificial intelligence. So I'd very much recommend to you to listen to that podcast, an hour-long podcast, to get a sense on the challenges that artificial intelligence poses to us. But give us a hint as well here, Noria. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you also, and congratulations for this initiative that you have launched. And I guess I could directly start by making some comments to Christina's observations, which I share at least partially, and then we can also discuss other existing challenges of today, data-driven sort of like AI systems. But perhaps even before any of this, it will be interesting to understand why would we want to use artificial intelligence to support human decision-making in such consequential, important aspects of our lives. And the main reason is because the hope and the potential is for human plus AI systems to make better decisions than humans alone. We know that we humans are not perfect, and our decisions are far from being perfect, as we read in the newspapers almost every day. We are susceptible to corruption. We have conflicts of interest. We are greedy. We have friends and enemies. We are hungry. We have bad days. We have our own biases, right? So human decisions are definitely not perfect. And the idea is, if data is a digital representation of an underlying reality, and this is an assumption, but let's assume that data is a representation of an underlying complex reality, and if we can develop algorithms that are able to learn from that data and model and find patterns and make predictions based on the data, in theory, we could improve human decision making, because these algorithms wouldn't be susceptible to corruption, or they wouldn't get tired or hungry, or they wouldn't have friends and enemies, and so forth. So the idea is, through the use of AI, mainly algorithms that are learning from data, could we improve human decision-making so we could have a more prosperous society? That's the goal, and that's the aspiration. And I firmly believe that this is the case, that we can actually do that. However, what we also know is that in the same way as humans are not perfect, algorithms are also not perfect, and they have a number of limitations. And the challenge is to see how we can overcome such limitations, and also how we can learn to work together in a very efficient way, finding synergies between humans and algorithms or AI. So the idea is not to replace the humans, but to somehow complement each other. So when we look at the limitations of AI systems, we find there are many, and I'm just going to connect with some of the observations from Christina. So as you probably know, in April of this year, the European Commission published a draft for a proposed regulation of AI systems, where the regulation proposal is not based on it's a little bit based on the use, in the sense that it assigns a risk to humans and to society for each of the different uses that you can have of AI systems, and depending on the risk associated to it, there will be different regulations, from being completely forbidden to not having almost any regulation at all, right? For unconsequential sort of like uses, of these systems. I completely agree that it doesn't make absolutely any sense to try to regulate a particular discipline or technology, because indeed everything, all the tools that we use, all the technologies that we use, their impact on society depends on how we use them. From a knife, which you can use to save lives or to kill people, nuclear technology, and of course artificial intelligence. So this is definitely the case, that it doesn't make any sense to try to regulate a technology per se without taking into account how it would be used. And when we think about some of the limitations, there are many. So maybe I can present sort of like a list a little bit of many of them, and why they are important and what is happening to try to address them. So one of the most commonly known, publicly known limitations of today's data-driven AI systems that are used for decision making is what is called algorithmic discrimination or bias. That is the unfair treatment by the algorithms to individuals just because of them belonging to certain categories that are defined by what is called protected attributes, which is usually gender, age, religion, ethnic group, country of origin, socioeconomic status. There are a certain number of protected attributes that we shouldn't take into consideration when we are making decisions about people. But what we are finding is that in many cases, algorithms that are trained from data might replicate or even exacerbate underlying existing patterns of discriminations in society. And there are many, many examples, from the most famous, probably first one, of the ProPublica report on the biases that they found in the Compass system that the judges in the US were using to support their decision making, to algorithms used to grant credits or credit card limits, or healthcare, or face detection, face recognition systems that work really well in white-skinned men, but work really bad in dark-skinned women, for example, and so forth. So to tackle these biases and discrimination, there are many technical solutions and many potential technical improvements that we can make. It's a very active area. And generally speaking, there are three places where we can address discrimination. The first place would be in the data itself. pre-processing the data, having an understanding of to which degree the data is actually biased, and trying to debias the data. So when the algorithms learn from the data, they're actually learning from a non-biased data set. The second place where you can, and the different strategies are not exclusive from each other. You can use them all at the same time. The second place where you can try to eliminate bias is in the algorithms themselves. So there is an entire body of work on how to develop fair machine learning algorithms that will have in their optimization function a component which is a fairness component. So they are not just optimizing how well they fit to the data or how well they explain a certain underlying phenomenon, but there is a component that explicitly relates to how fair the results are. And finally, discrimination can also be addressed in post-processing. So once the algorithms provide their outputs, if their outputs are biased, no one is forcing us to follow exactly what the algorithm says, so we can actually understand whether those outputs are biased and then compensate for the bias. So that's algorithmic discrimination. A second important limitation that is also well known is what is called the computational violation of privacy. The ability to infer very personal information about people from non-personal data, from likes on a social network or from publicly available information about them, or even just from the patterns of access to the Wi-Fi network. Using these seemingly sort of like harmless inputs, it has been demonstrated that you can infer very personal attributes such as sexual orientation or political orientation, or obviously sex, gender and age, levels of education, interests, and so forth. So it's very important to understand that it's not just if the data is personal data, the raw data is personal data or not, that from very, very apparently innocuous data, you can actually infer very personal attributes about people. The third area is the area of asymmetry and the manipulation of human behavior. Today, we live in a situation of tremendous asymmetry. Asymmetry in terms of who has access to very valuable data about people, because we live in an oligopoly, fundamentally, of technology companies that have an unprecedented power in the world, both in North America and in China. And these companies are the custodians of massive amounts of human behavioral data and other kinds of data that are proprietary and that no one has access to. So that creates a very severe asymmetry in society, where both citizens themselves, but also academic institutions or other companies and startups have a lot of difficulties to actually make progress and contribute to the sort of like the state of the world because of this lack in many cases of access to valuable data. But also this asymmetry gives a huge amount of power to the companies that have access to the data, generating situations where they can easily manipulate our own behavior. We know that we humans are relatively easily manipulatable, and there are examples of how all of us are subject to certain levels of manipulation on a daily basis. Where do recommendations end, or where does persuasion end and manipulation start, is actually a very fine line. And there are very simple examples, such as the fact that the search engines rank the results, and we know that whatever is placed at the top is what people are going to be looking at. No one looks at the bottom of the page, and even less to page 30, from the search results. So who decides what's placed at the top? Whoever is deciding that has a lot of power, because he knows that millions and millions of people are going to be reading that. So that's a sort of like a subliminal, effect that you can have in manipulating people's access to information. Or, for example, when we are searching on a search engine and there is a completion of the sentence that we are searching, what it says on that completion, it has been proven, to influence people's opinions. So depending on whether if I type, just to give an example, I don't know, John Smith, and then he says, oh, he's a wonderful person, candidate to Nobel Prize, best leader in the world, or I type John Smith, and then he completes, oh, should probably go to jail, is a terrible person. That is influencing our opinion that we might have, about John Smith. So how to reveal and identify these potential situations of manipulation of human behavior and how to combat them is an active area of research. Another limitation, and Christina has mentioned this, is what is called opacity, algorithmic opacity. This means the lack of transparency, the inability for a non-expert user to, or for an expert user in many cases, or an expert designer to understand why the algorithm is behaving in the way that it's behaving. I agree that, of course, depending on the use case and depending on the situation in terms of what regulation the systems have been subjected to, we need more or less transparency. I don't need to know how a plane flies, but I trust that every single piece in the plane and the plane itself has undergone many security tests and is compliant with all the regulation for flights. So I can trust that everything is working properly, and I don't need to know. But if that wasn't in place, I would probably want to know how the plane works before I jump into the plane and I use it, right? So I think the amount of knowledge that we need to have about how something works depends on how much we can delegate such knowledge into the system, assuming there are provisions, regulations, standards that are met, and tests that are done to certify that actually the system does what it's supposed to be doing. We don't have that right now in many of the use cases of artificial intelligence, and that's why in those situations we need to make sure that there is transparency. But it's also important that there is transparency in terms of what kind of data is being used, in a way that is actually practical for people. With GDPR, we get bombarded every day with asking us for consent for, what kinds of cookies, the different websites are accessing to. But I think that, and not really, I don't think that that's probably the most appropriate way to communicate with people, because it becomes completely frustrating, and most people don't even look at it and just agree, because what they want is access the information. So we do need to, I think, do a better job in understanding sort of the human factor, and in making sure that when we are being transparent, it's actually useful transparency, and it's actually constructive transparency. Another big challenge, which hasn't been mentioned, is the challenge of veracity. So today, using AI algorithms, we can generate fake content, fake images, fake audios, fake videos, fake text. When I say fake, I mean not generated by a human or not corresponding to an underlying reality, content that looks completely real to any human. We can generate pictures that are extremely realistic, and we think this is an actual human being, and it's not. It's purely made up. Or we can make people say things that they never said in videos, right? And no one would notice that this is actually fake. So this ability is to generate all this synthetic content is certainly disrupting, and has the potential to have a big impact in the formation of public opinion. For example, if you have the ability to generate all this synthetic content and distribute it to millions and millions of people who, in most of the cases, are already very distracted in their daily life, so they don't really pay a lot of attention to the stuff that we consume, right? And we even have less of an ability to discern how much of that content is actually real and how much is not. Another challenge is the lack of diversity. And the lack of diversity refers to different elements. The first element is the lack of diversity in the algorithms themselves. Many of the algorithms that are modeling our tastes, our interests, our what we do, how we feel, our emotions, tend to cast us in certain stereotypes. So if I read a lot of, mystery novels, so the algorithms that I'm trying to understand what I like might just think, oh, she only likes mystery novels, and then they keep recommending mystery novels to me. Or if I only read news about a certain topic or with a certain political inclination, the algorithms just show me stuff that is similar to what I like. And they do that because they want to maximize the success that I will like it. But the problem when there is this lack of diversity is that you generate what is called filter bubbles or echo chambers, where people are not exposed to content that disagrees with them or that is different to what they usually consume. And in part, it is believed that the increasing polarization that we are experiencing in society could be due to these filter bubbles and echo chambers that are generated. But diversity also refers to the lack of diversity in the field. We are talking about AI. AI is at the core of the fourth industrial revolution. AI is transforming every aspect of our society, and AI is being used almost in every sector and almost everywhere on the planet. However, most of these AI systems have been developed by very non-diverse teams of programmers, mostly located in North America or China, and mostly male, with a certain sort of like profile. So there are studies that show that the lack of diversity in technology, broadly speaking, and in AI, specifically speaking, is probably responsible for billions of dollars in a lack of innovation and in a lack of inclusiveness in the systems that we develop. So we also need to make sure that we increase the diversity in the field of AI if we want to make sure that we will leverage AI to tackle the big challenges that we face as a species. And if we want to make sure that the systems that we deploy are actually meaningful and are actually inclusive and are respectful to every person on the planet, not just to a group of people. And finally, the last important challenge is that none of these systems, in the same way as we are easily manipulatable and we have our own flaws, these AI systems that we use are, of course, not perfect. And they can be fooled. They can be hacked. And in fact, there is an entire field, which is the field of adversarial AI, which objective is to design AI algorithms that fool other AI algorithms. And you could think, why would you want to fool an AI algorithm? It's very simple. If my life depends on what an AI algorithm is going to decide, and I don't like what it's going to decide, I'll probably be very motivated to try to fool it so it decides something else. So there are many examples of how relatively easy it is to fool these systems. For example, you have a picture of a panda bear, and the system that recognizes animals in images says, oh, that's a panda bear. And then I add, I change a couple pixels in the panda bear, or I add a little bit of noise to the panda bear image, but to a human eye, it looks exactly the same. It looks exactly like a panda bear image. And I show it to the system, and the system says, oh, that's 100% like I'm confident that that's a monkey or something else. There are other examples where, there's a face recognition system, and then it recognizes me, no problem. But then I put on some funny glasses, and then it thinks I'm a man, a completely different person. And it's very confident, that is not me. Or systems that are used to detect pedestrians, for example, in autonomous driving, or, in other smart cities applications. And then I wear a certain t-shirt that makes me invisible to the camera, so I don't exist to the system. So if the car doesn't see me, it could run over me, right? So there are many, many, many examples of how these systems are a little bit brittle and fragile, and they can be fooled in ways that humans wouldn't be fooled. And that's why we really need to understand not only the potential that they have and the power that they have, but also understand the limitations that they might have, because we cannot forget that AI is just software. So it's extremely scalable, and it's extremely easy to deploy, some of these algorithms in millions and millions and millions and millions of devices or phones or, webcams or, social platforms. So by the time we might realize that they have a flaw or that they have a vulnerability, there is already millions of people that have used them, and you can't just put the genie back in the bottle once the genie has been released from the bottle. And that's why it's important to understand these considerations, and to do as exhaustive of tests as possible, or use sandbox environments or some kind of environments to pilot these kinds of algorithms and systems before deploying them, potentially in millions, of devices. But having said all of this and having focused on the limitations, I started mentioning the potential, and why use algorithms. And I firmly believe that our own survival as a species depends on our ability to leverage, broadly speaking, technology, but specifically speaking, AI. I think AI is playing and will play a crucial role in helping us tackle many of the challenges that we face, from the aging of the population to the climate emergency, the energy crisis, or pandemics. So we do need AI. I think we have a tremendous opportunity ahead of us. And I think the most important thing is that, we make sure that we maximize, the positive impact while minimizing and making sure that the potential unintended, negative consequences are minimized. Thank you.
Gracias, Noria. Thank you very much. It was absolutely fascinating and enlightening what you brought to us. I will keep one idea to carry the conversation forward, perhaps with Andrea, and then with the reactions that you might want to add to what Andrea has to say, which is the question of governance, right? I mean, the governance framework that is created as we speak, and for which there are multiple models to regulate the impact of AI and the role of technological firms in there, and the difficulties that this governance of this area of our societies and our economies clashes with more traditional regulatory frameworks that are very much established along the lines of more solid and traditional ways of understanding governance. Let me give you an example here. You might be aware, those who are listening, but also yourself, Noria, of the recent attack that the Autonomous University of Barcelona has suffered from hackers who have basically made the whole system to go down for multiple weeks, for several weeks, including emails, internal servers, all sort of activities, online campus, everything has been hacked. And thus the hackers are asking now, before they are threatening now to release the data into the deep web and make it accessible there, unless a ransom is paid and unless they receive the money they're asking for. Well, it so happens that the procurement mechanisms of the Autonomous University of Barcelona as a public body follows a certain number of steps, according to which, for instance, you need to ask for 3 different budgets to 3 different companies and decide on who provides the best value for money, and thus who would be able to provide those services to confront the danger that these hackers represent. Well, it so happens that the hackers won't wait for the 3 budgets to be obtained by the Autonomous University of Barcelona. So this shows how difficult it is to follow traditional well-established rules on public procurement, for instance, when you are dealing with, as we speak, dynamics and as we speak, motivations happening within the
completely
technological
agree. Absolutely, completely agree. I think our legislation is from the, I don't know, before any of the industrial revolutions in many cases, and we live in the 4th industrial revolution in a digital world, and the transformation that we will need to do of our bureaucracy, extremely bureaucratic system, I think is massive, but I think it's also absolutely necessary, because we find ourselves in situations like the one you described, where you have an entire university, in a situation of ransomware, and you have to make decisions within like an hour. And then they're asking you to do, and if it's more than 15,000, you might need to do licitación, which could take like, I don't know how many months. And in the meanwhile, there is no university. No one is working. You're not functioning, right?
So it's a question. It's a question of speed, but also it's a question of the frameworks that are well established and that constrain traditional organizations and traditional methods, particularly the public sphere and the public bodies. And of course, speed also relates to the necessary slow process that any legislation and that any sort of regulation entails, right? Because there are certain democratic criteria to be fulfilled, certain public steps to be followed, several institutions involved in a given decision. So all this is very much against the idea that we need to act fast on a sphere of the economy that is developing very quickly without many borders, physical or even online borders, non-existent borders. So this is certainly a challenge. But let me stop this here. This first inputs and something that I'd like to elaborate a bit more if we have time. But let me now give the floor to Andrea, who is our researcher here at CIDOB, also focusing on AI, and as I said, within the Global Cities program, but also looking at the global impact of AI and the challenges that are posed. Andrea, all yours for first comments and reactions to Noria's inputs and everything that has been said so far.
Well, first of all, I really need to say that, Noria, it is a pleasure to meet you again in a forum like this that we have at CIDOB, which makes me also feel really proud that we were able to invite you and that you were able to accept our invitation. You know that every time that we speak, we tend to have a very fruitful conversation. So this is going to be yet another chance for us to do it. And I was thinking, what should I talk about right now? And I think that what I'm going to try to bring forward are some of the points that have been brought up by, of course, Noria, but also Cristina, that I think are very, very important while discussing AI. The first thing, which is probably the most important thing, is that AI is a tool, meaning that as of now, we don't have a general purpose algorithm, and it is very unlikely that we will at some point be able to develop one. But what we have right now is disruptive enough as to know that there's always going to be, or we need to ensure there is always going to be a human in the loop. So for that, I want to say that, Noria, what you said, like completely in a super easy manner, it is what we need to pursue. And I think that's one of the things that the 35 people who have been like gathering with us today are the things that they're working on. And by the way, if you have any questions, I want you to feel free to write them on the chat, and then we can respond in the discussion. So AI as a tool must always support human decision. That means there is always going to be a human decision to take the last decision. So automating tasks is something that happens, and it's something that has to happen, but we need to ensure, and that's probably one of the regulatory things or like governance situations, that there is always going to be a human decision in the end. And I'm going to give you a couple of other examples also to bring about like the second topic that I think is necessary. And it's about like fairness in how we're building algorithms today. Think, for instance, of the algorithm that is like trying to, and I'm going to use quotes unquotes, predict emissions. And therefore we base our knowledge on that. And therefore we base our policies on reduction of emissions, now that we're in this COP26 environment, on the predictions of that algorithm. And this is a real story. The Washington Post a couple days ago just announced that the models were inherently flawed because of the multiplicity of inputs that were by itself biased. And that allows me to refer to Noria's point. But what is the impact of that? That we are not doing enough because we don't have enough data that is non-biased. And another thing that is part of this is that when we're building algorithms based on historic bias, and there has been like societal bias back then, we're by the means of doing that, we're also building bias. For example, take for instance algorithms built to, now that we're speaking about universities, right, to allocate to know whether a person should be let in or out at different degree. And then we take the data from the people who have studied that degree and their success. And now we find out that most of the people who have ever studied engineering are men. Therefore, a woman would be less likely by this algorithm to be allocated into an engineering spot in university. So we were speaking about real things that are happening right now that can have a very disruptive impact on our future. And that was my first point. And the second one relates on how AI relates to other emerging tech. And you have mentioned cybersecurity, and Noria has brilliantly mentioned adversarial AI. But it is true that there is not enough people working on AI security. There's more people developing AI tools. And that's another gap that regulation and governance must fill, like to create enough incentives for the industry to work on AI security. And that takes me to the governance framework. Noria also mentioned the AI Act, which is now being discussed. And I want to say something which many people do not really know, and that is that even though the European approach tends to be ethics-based, regulations, or this regulation is going to be risk-based. And that leads me to my last point. It is hard to know which values are the ones that we want our technology to represent. And even though the European Union has lots of work around ethics, the high-level expert groups, and so on and so forth, what we are trying to deal with is with a regulation that will regulate high-risk applications based on what? Based on basically our sensitivities. Because as Cristina has said before, we might want to have an algorithm that help us early identify possible diseases and therefore not to compromise our health and take preventive action. But if these algorithms, which comes from a very sensitive sector, which is health, fall into other people's hands, then we may have a problem. So with these three items, like of course, like trying to put the human always at the center and trying to use AI to support human decision, try to review the way we're doing AI in the means of course, bias being one of the most sensitive topics, but of course, like also trying to enforce security. And with all the different challenges that regulation is having right now, not only that we don't find consensus on how we should regulate AI, or how we should like not only if we should regulate technology or not, but which values do we want the AI to represent. At the international level, there is still no real consensus about that. And therefore, we don't have an international regulation dealing with these issues, because AI can also help advance national interest. And national interest not only means of national security, but also means of the strategic or competitive advantage that some of your companies have over others. And therefore, you want this to continue this way. Innovation per innovation tends not to be the most let's say, human-centric thing to do when it comes to technology. So Noria, I would like to ask you one question, and that is that you're right now, and you have like worked a lot on AI, on different aspects of AI. Based on all these limitations and challenges, what is the way forward? Right? Like, how can we try to make a regulation to extend globally? Because we have been speaking very briefly about like how the EU is trying to put forward regulation, but it only applies, of course, inside the EU. It can, of course, help influence others, but can we really create a governance framework that works for everyone without actually bringing everyone to the table and not having everyone agree on what we think the development of AI should be?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, all we have to do is look at what is going on with the climate summit right now in Glasgow, where everyone is supposed to be at the table. But I don't know if you've seen how the different drafts of commitments have evolved as the days go by, where, you know, they started pretty ambitious the first day. And now I think it's a very watered down, kind of ambiguous, you know, kind of like goal, you know, that they are setting. So I think it's very, very complicated to achieve this international, you know, global collaboration, even though I think ideally probably would be what we would need. The way forward is very complicated, and I am happy I'm not a regulator because I don't think it is definitely trivial to figure out how to do this. But I do think that we need to do something. I do think that if we look on, you know, the sectors or the use cases, you know, it's probably easier to understand the scope, the impact, and also how to regulate in that context. And that's what we do with food. That's what we do with medications. You know, that's what we do with, you know, appliances. You know, so they're sectorial, you know, applications that we can look at. The challenge is there are new applications, new use cases, new sectors that didn't exist traditionally, like social media, social networks, that didn't exist before. And then the other challenge is the boundaries are also not very well defined in many cases between, what the use case is, and the impact is also not well understood in many cases. What is the psychological impact that social platforms have on teenagers? We are still trying to understand that, right? Partly because there is no data, publicly available data, to be able to model and understand this. So it is a complicated situation, because in some domains, I think we might have a clear definition of what the boundaries are, and what what the rules of the game are. But in other sectors and use cases, we don't have that, and I think that's what also makes it so complicated. Combined with the fact that we are talking about software that can be, as I mentioned, deployed instantaneously in millions and millions of people's devices, across the globe, in different cultures, in different countries, with different values, and also with different legislations. So that also makes it very difficult. So I don't know if I can answer your question. What I do know is that it's important and probably urgent that something is done. How it is done and what is done, I think, is one of the key questions, to address. I mean, there are certain things that we know beyond the regulatory element. We do know that we need to invest more in education. We do know that we need to transform our public administrations. We do know that we need to attract more diverse talent to the field. We do know that we need to attract actually more talent to the field overall. So there are certain things that we clearly know and that I'm not sure we're even implementing right now. And some of them take a long time to deliver results. For example, investments in education. Usually that's not something that happens in the short term, to see the impact. You need, a few years to see the impact. And I'm not sure we are really investing as ambitiously as we should, for example, in that regard. So in some areas, I think there's clarity on what needs to be done. In some other areas, it's more difficult to figure out how to do it, but we can try to replicate and leverage use cases and sectors that work well and that well regulated, and that we believe could be an example for other use cases or other sectors that are unregulated right now.
So basically, what you're saying is that we need to respect the three multi words of AI development, which is to have a multi-level governance approach. This is something that we as CIDOB are trying to enforce. For example, within the Global Cities program, we have launched an observatory of AI, and we're trying to push certain ethical values that cities from the network can use to inform their public policies, and that is a way to create policies in the light of the lack of international regulation. So multi-level governance also applies to the industry, and that's the approach that the US follow most of the times. You create specific regulations for specific industries based on the specific use cases. That happens with privacy, for example, and that's what it's happening, for example, in healthcare and so on. So that would be like the first multi-level governance. The second one is multi-stakeholder, including all the visions in it, because policymakers do not have normally all the potential impact at hand. We act from our level of expertise. We act from what we know, and just informing ourselves with the visions of other actors, I think it's very relevant. And that's something that at least the EU is trying to put forward also, or always trying to have a multi-stakeholder approach to it. And the third one, which probably connects to what you said about education and attracting talent to the field, it's about multidisciplinary approach to AI. We do not need only developers to be working on that. We need social scientists, we need think tanks, we need policymakers, we need people who can think from the different angles that AI entails, because it's something that, of course, it is transforming our society. So as you said, we need psychologists to understand what is the impact of these algorithms. We need like people from all across the university spectrum to know what is this, because after all, I think that probably my last reflection here is that What we're building right now is what is going to build our future. And how do we want to build our future? It's what we need to start working on. But I really appreciate the fact that you say that we know what we have to do, at least as of now, but we need to prevent things to come. We cannot be catching up all the time. And I think that is probably a hard thing to say. I don't know. What do you think, Noria? Because I think this is something that really concerns you and that worries you as well.
Well, I mean, I do believe, I mean, we have to acknowledge that government systems and public institutions, as we mentioned, they need to undergo severe, profound transformations to be more agile, to be more digital, to be more modern and participants of today's, the 21st century. And that's going to take time. And it's not going to happen, immediately. So what to do in the meanwhile? And I do think that one of the elements that I see lacking is more empowerment and more civil society movements. And to do that, you need to have informed citizens. You need to invest in education. But I do think that civil society has a strong role to play that I don't think is playing right now. At the end of the day, each of us, increasingly from babies to really, old people in the planet and everywhere on the planet, is increasingly reliant on technology, is increasingly interacting with AI algorithms on their daily basis. And what are we doing as a society with respect to that? What kind of reflection are we having? What kind of understanding are we having on the impact that this is having on us, on an individual but also collective way? I don't see a lot of empowerment in the civil society, and I don't see a lot of movements from civil society, which could be an interesting element to explore and to develop until the public institutions kind of like react and update themselves and become more agile in their in the development of frameworks and legislation and regulation to ensure that technological development translates into progress. I always say, innovation doesn't equal progress. Technology development doesn't equal progress, and this is something that we very, very, very much need to understand. And we need to make sure that we create environments and we incentivize innovation that actually will contribute to progress, that will improve the quality of life of everyone on the planet, not just of a few people, that will improve the situation in the planet itself and all the ecosystems on the planet, right? And that is not guaranteed if we don't actually make sure that that will happen.
Noria, thank you very much, Noria, for your inputs. Also, thank you very much to Andrea for her reactions, but also thoughtful inputs on the discussion we are having. It's been extremely enriching, and we've had the opportunity to present many of the issues that accompany algorithmic governance and artificial intelligence. That was the topic of our second Future Leaders Forum, the joint initiative between CIDOB and Banco Santander. It was exactly in line with our ambition to unite the study of digital affairs and international affairs in the forming of a new global digital order, in line with the first edition last year of the Future Leaders Forum, and also with a very good way to gather these 35 young voices that are already being the key change makers when it comes to the issues that we've been discussing today. But now, let me now please give the floor for the closing speech to Carme Artigas. Carme Artigas, she is the Secretary of State for Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence of the government of Spain. She was also present in the first edition of the Future Leaders Forum, and she was very interested, I recall, in the initiative, to have the chance to meet these young voices, but also to contribute thematically with the priorities of the government of Spain that are being put forward. So, Secretary of State, thank you very much again for joining us in this initiative, and the floor is all yours. Oh, sorry, I think you are muted, Secretary of State. Maybe we can't hear yet. Just a second. Maybe it's our Enric. Just give us a minute because apparently there's a setup problem. Carmen, I don't know if puedes leer lo que te escriben en el chat, a ver si en la ruedecita esta de Cam Mic y aquí en audio. En el micrófono. Sorry for the slight delay. Just give us a few minutes, please, and we'll sort this out. So we're just waiting for the reconnection of the Secretary of State. Time to go for a quick coffee if you like. Just give us a couple of minutes until we sort this out, please. Thank you. So as you all know, while we wait for the Secretary of State to be reconnected, we have the networking session later on after we have finished this public session. Please remember that the networking session, which is a private session among the members of the 35 under 35 list last year, who are joining the 35 under 35 list this year. This session, as I said, is a private networking session, and it's taking place through a different platform. It's taking place via Teams. You will all have received the link to connect to the other platform that will enable us an interactive discussion where you can all participate and be part of that discussion with your mics on, and this session will take place immediately after we have had a chance to listen to the Secretary of State, who's apparently back with us. Let's see if we can try to.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Perfectly well, all yours.
Okay. Good morning then, everyone. Now we are quite used to these demo effects when we just need it. So it is a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to be again together with you and to close this Santander-CIDOB Future Leaders Forums. And first of all, I would like to thank Banco Santander and CIDOB for inviting me to this event. And most importantly, to congratulate you to promote this collaboration program for the second consecutive year, because this is a great initiative to continue identifying and supporting young talent and the dialogue among future global leaders. And I would like to congratulate, of course, the 35 young men and women that have been listed in this Santander-CIDOB 35 under 35 list. People with their whole future ahead of them, called to be the future leaders of the new digital world that is already a reality and which it is completely transforming our lives. A new world full of unprecedented opportunities for technological, economic, and social progress, but also of significant risks, threats, and uncertainties around the great challenges due to technologies with such a broad transformative potential. These risks or these uncertainties grow from the preservation of citizens' rights and freedoms in the digital world to the changes in the new digital global order that this implies. As you all know, the world has changed forever. It is undeniable that technological transformation is already a revolution that is transforming all areas of politics, economy, and society. Digitalization, innovation, and the growth of digital economy and the increasing weight of technologies such as artificial intelligence or big data are shaping a new global order. An impact of technological disruption with multiple implications on the change of the economic and social model and the power relations at geopolitical level. And it directly affects the guarantee of individual rights and freedoms of citizens around the world. Technology has not only transformed the nature of power, but also its balance and distribution among states, as well as the role of large private companies with an increasing weight in the global economy. New dynamics, new correlation of forces at the global level in which governance on issues such as artificial intelligence, data, or algorithms has acquired an essential weight. We are witnessing a confrontation in the models of use and management of AI among United States, China, and the European Union. Different ways of facing the challenges of the digital revolution that are trying to impose themselves in a very competitive global environment. In this context, from the government of Spain, we are clear about the need to build a national and European digital sovereignty, a very important step to prosper as a nation and maintain our independence in this global order in strategic sectors such as AI or the data economy. Our national digitalization project involves developing a human-centric and ethical vision as a priority of this digital transformation. Digitalization that must be focused on people, leaving no one behind, with a strong social vocation and respect for democracy and human rights. This humanistic approach that we want to turn into the hallmark of the digital transformation, both at national and European level. This is why Spain is pushing for this Charter of Digital Rights. Therefore, we believe in the need of updating the current legislation to actively promote European values in areas as data protection, cybersecurity, and AI ethical by design. To this end, we are working together with our European partners on an essential project, a proposal for a European regulation on AI. This European Commission regulation is a major step forward in the design of Europe-wide digitalization based on the respect for our values and fundamental rights. A proposal aimed to seek a common agreement around the democratic principles that define our way of facing the challenges of digitalization, and I am sure this is going to be a differential perspective from the European Union. To this end, this proposed regulation establishes serious, as not allowed practices in this area, practices related to high-risk AI applications that require a series of clear and shared rules that generate certainty about their operation and social integration. The objective is to generate an environment of trust among citizens in a context of great uncertainty. We all are aware of the enormous potential of AI and data to generate value in our economy. Therefore, we do not want to limit innovation by companies and institutions in any way. The goal is to coordinate this capacity for innovation with respect for citizens' rights and the values of democracy. With this in mind, the Spanish government has launched a pioneering and innovative project, the Charter of Digital Rights, a document that offers a national regulatory framework to address the ethical, social, and legislative challenges of artificial intelligence. Challenges that digitalization and disruptive technologies imply as a transformative and cross-cutting element, with the aim to generate a safe, reliable, and guaranteeing environment with the rights and democratic values of our society. This is a document aimed to be updated the existing rights and adapt them to the new circumstances of the digital reality. Among these rights, included in the Charter are, of course, those related to AI, such as algorithmic non-discrimination, a fundamental issue for this strategy of human-centered digitalization of Spain, for which we have also put in place an observatory on the social impact of algorithms. Furthermore, in another essential area, such as neurotechnologies, we also want to ensure ethical development, in which decision-making is not conditioned by the provision of incomplete data, and that the owner of brainwaves data is in the hands of the citizens. To this end, a few weeks ago, we launched a call for interest to seek proposals on the program we have named Spain Neurotech, a new Spain to build a European Center for Innovation in Neurotechnology and Neural Rights. Just to finish, I would like to say goodbye and congratulate once again all the young people included in the list presented today. And especially a great thanks and congratulations to the 20 women who are part of it, a large female representation that I was very happy to see. And this represents an enormous young female digital talent that we must promote and encourage thanks to this type of programs, as well as the commitment of Banco Santander and CIDOB to make visible the work of great female leaders who will mark the next decade. Thanks again to both institutions for inviting me to this great event and to all of you who have been following. We hope to see you next year. Thank you very much.
Secretary of State, thank you. Thank you very much for your support, for sharing with us the perspectives of the Spanish government and the different initiatives that are very much in line with what has been discussed on this year's edition, but also last year's edition. And I agree. It's this year. It's clearly, as it was last year, an area dominated by female leaders, young leaders, taking a leading role in generating knowledge, but also action on this very timely and important matter that we've been discussing. And also the persons who have collaborated with us here in this session. Also 4 magnificent women who have been able to share with us their thoughts, starting with the Secretary of State, but also joined by Nuria Olive and Andrea Rodriguez last few minutes, and then Cristina San Jose also from Banco Santander. So let me end the discussion here by thanking you again very much your presence, for following us, for being interested in this innovative and promoting the voice of youth in this topic. So an initiative that has been possible with the support of Banco Santander, but first and foremost that has been possible thanks to the 35 young leaders that have been joining this edition this year. Now, as I said, we have a few minutes to launch our networking session made privately via Teams. Those who are following us via YouTube and are part of the list, please follow the link on Teams, and we'll see you there in a couple of minutes. So thank you very much. Very nice to see you, and look forward to the next edition next year of the Future Leaders Forum between Santander and CIDOB. Thank you very much. Have a good day.